let's play a little game. When you hear the phrase, water, water everywhere, what's the next line that pops into your head? Exactly. We all have this romantic image of sailors surrounded by an endless ocean, desperately wishing for a single drop of fresh water. You probably think they just packed a few barrels, hoped for rain, and spent the rest of the time slowly getting thirstier and thirstier, right? Well, that's not the full story. You think getting fresh water at sea was a simple matter of luck, but the truth is, it was one of the most complex, high-stakes engineering challenges of its time. The solutions they came up with were a bizarre mix of ancient wisdom, clumsy desperation, and sparks of pure genius. Forget pirates and sea monsters. The real battle was fought inside a slimy, disgusting water barrel. And today, we're going to unseal those barrels and see what horrors and what clever tricks were hiding inside. So, why was this such a big deal? It's just water, right? Wrong. On a long voyage, water isn't just a drink, it's your lifeline. And that lifeline is constantly under attack. Your real enemy isn't just thirst, it's biology. Imagine this. You're packing for a trip that will last 6 months. You fill dozens of huge wooden barrels with the cleanest river water you can find. For the first few weeks, everything's fine. But then things start to get weird. The water, sitting stagnant in the dark, warm hold of a ship, becomes a 5-star hotel for algae and bacteria. It starts to turn green and slimy. Insects that laid their eggs in the water back on land begin to hatch. The whole thing starts to smell like a swamp. Sailors described it as stinking and fetid. Drinking this sludge wasn't just disgusting, it was a one-way ticket to diseases like dysentery, cholera, and typhoid fever, which could cripple a crew faster than any cannonball. Dehydration was a terrifying prospect, but a ship-wide epidemic from contaminated water was a guaranteed disaster. On a ship with 200 sailors, an outbreak could mean you wouldn't have enough healthy hands to even sail the vessel. This wasn't just about staying hydrated. It was about keeping the entire mission from sinking into a literal cesspool of disease. They had to find a way to make water last, or find a way to make it fresh in the middle of nowhere. Their first attempts were creative, to say the least. Before they figured out what worked, sailors tried some truly bizarre methods that sound like something out of a fantasy novel. One of the earliest ideas, reportedly used by Greek sailors, was the woolly condenser. The idea was to hang sheep pelts over the side of the ship at night. The cool night air would cause dew to condense on the wool fibers. In the morning, they'd wring out the pelts to get fresh water. It's a form of natural distillation, which is clever. But can you imagine? All right, lads, time for your morning ration of wool-flavored water. It was hardly a scalable solution for a thirsty crew. Then there was the Roman naturalist Pliny's suggestion. Throw wax balls into the ocean, let them absorb something, and then get fresh water from them. The specifics are a bit fuzzy, probably because it didn't work at all. Another hilariously bad idea was simply hoping to find a freshwater spring at the bottom of the ocean. Yes, this is a real thing. Submarine springs do exist, but the odds of finding one in the middle of the Atlantic with 17th century technology were about the same as finding a mermaid riding a unicorn. These methods were like trying to put out a house fire with a water pistol. They were cute but completely impractical for the massive demand of a long sea voyage. It was clear they couldn't rely on such flimsy tricks. They needed something more robust. So, how did they solve this life-and-death puzzle? It came down to 3 main strategies: store it smart, find it fresh, or make it new. The most obvious solution was just to bring a lot of water with you, but how you stored it was everything. The standard container was the wooden cask or barrel. A single large warship might carry over 100 tons of water in its hold. But, as we know, water in a wooden barrel goes bad. So sailors developed a few tricks. First, they used specific types of wood, like oak, which were less porous. A skilled cooper or barrel maker was one of the most important people on a ship. Second, they discovered that adding a little bit of alcohol, like beer, wine, or rum, to the water could slow down the growth of algae and bacteria. This led to the famous naval drink grog, rum diluted with water, which not only preserved the water, but also made the slimy taste a bit more bearable. The most surprising detail was sailors knew that the water went through a sick phase. It would get disgusting, green, and smelly, but if they waited long enough, the sludge would eventually settle to the bottom and the water on top would become relatively clear and drinkable again. It's like a modern kombucha brew, but instead of a tasty, fizzy drink, you get slightly less poisonous swamp water. When your barrels ran low, the next best thing was a gift from the heavens, rain. But collecting it wasn't as simple as just holding a bucket out. Sailors would spread large canvases or even their ship's sails to create a massive funnel. However, they had to be careful. The sails and rigging were coated in salt from sea spray, so they had to let the rain wash the sails for a while before they started collecting the runoff. One Spanish account from a 16th century voyage describes collecting 300 jars of water from a single heavy downpour, a great consolation for the crew. This was an amazing source of fresh water, but it had one massive flaw. You couldn't rely on it. A ship could get stuck in the doldrums, areas with no wind and no rain for weeks, with the crew watching the sky in desperation. It was a fantastic bonus, but a terrible primary plan. This is where the real genius comes in. For centuries, people knew the basic principle of distillation. If you boil salt water, the steam that comes off is fresh water. All you have to do is collect that steam and let it condense back into liquid. Simple, right? On a wooden ship, not so much. Building a big fire to boil huge vats of water was incredibly dangerous and required a massive amount of fuel, which was also in short supply. Early attempts were small and inefficient. But by the mid-1700s, inventors started creating more sophisticated distillation plants specifically for ships. They were often connected to the ship's galley stove, using the heat from cooking to boil seawater in a separate contraption. It was slow, and it produced limited quantities, but it worked. For the first time, a ship could manufacture its own fresh water in the middle of the ocean. This was like inventing a portable spring. It was a game changer. No story about naval innovation is complete without mentioning the legendary Captain James Cook. He was obsessed with the health of his crew, and that included their water supply. On his long voyages in the 1770s, Cook was one of the early adopters of onboard distillation, but he also experimented with a much colder method. While sailing in the Antarctic, he proved that you could get fresh water by melting blocks of sea ice. He found that the ice formed from seawater was surprisingly fresh, as most of the salt is left behind in the freezing process. This was a crucial discovery for any future polar explorers. But here's a funny anecdote about the importance of water. For centuries, the main way to get water was to stop at a known freshwater source on land, a process called watering. This was often the single most important reason for a ship to make landfall. Pirate ships, naval vessels, explorers, they all had their secret spots. Captains would trade maps of good watering holes like they were treasure maps. Imagine a fearsome pirate like Blackbeard having to delay his plundering because he had to stop and fill up his water barrels at a little stream in the Caribbean. It brings a certain domestic reality to a life of high seas adventure. So the next time you see a movie about the Age of Sail, look past the sword fights and the cannon smoke. The real drama, the one that determined the fate of every voyage, was happening quietly in the ship's hold. The struggle for clean drinking water was a constant, desperate battle against nature. It pushed sailors to become innovators, using everything from sheep's wool and rainwater to complex steam-powered machines. That slimy, disgusting barrel of water was in many ways more important than the ship's cannons. It was more valuable than any treasure they might find. It was the fuel that powered the age of discovery, and the simple, brilliant solutions they found to keep it flowing are a testament to human ingenuity in the face of one of our most basic needs. It just goes to show you that sometimes the most groundbreaking technology in the world isn't a weapon or an engine. Sometimes it's just a clever way to get a clean glass of water. Thanks for watching. If you're thirsty for more historical deep dives, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Let me know in the comments what other maritime mysteries you'd like me to explore. Until next time.